This episode takes us through the philandering life of one of the most cold-hearted murderers of the 20th century, and a crime made more terrible by the gruesome aftermath. This is Vintage Murders and the horrific slaughter of Emily Kaye. Patrick Mahon was born in Edge Hill in Liverpool to middle-class Irish parents in 1860. As a child, Mahon proved to be above average at school and a talented footballer. He also went regularly to the local Catholic church. Shortly after leaving school, Mahon secured employment as a bookkeeper. He later became a church worker and Sunday school teacher, and later married his fiancée, Jessie, who he had first met at school. The couple had 2 children. He was also arrested for burgling the home of a clergyman. In 1911, Mahon stole £123 from his employers, abandoning his wife and eloping to the Isle of Man with another woman. He was treated with leniency by the authorities for this crime, receiving a formal caution. Mahon's wife also forgave him, and he returned to live with her, securing employment at a Wiltshire dairy farm. He was fired a year later, after his employers discovered he had stolen £60. For this offence, he was imprisoned for 1 year. When he was released, he and his wife relocated to the town of Calne in Wiltshire, where their 2 children were born, and over time he developed a gambling habit. In 1916, Mahon is known to have committed the attempted murder of a servant girl in the Surrey town of Chertsey. The circumstances were that a girl discovered Mahon burgling her employer's home, whereupon he attacked her with a hammer, hitting her several times across the head in order to find out where the keys to the safe were kept. The victim of this assault regained consciousness to find herself being embraced by Mahon, who implored her to forgive him. He was brought to trial for the aggravated assault and attempted burglary. Medical testimony at this trial revealed that Mahon had likely intended to kill this young woman, and had she not had such a generous head of hair, she would likely have died of her injuries. He appealed for leniency, stating his intentions to join the army, but he was sentenced to a term of 5 years' imprisonment, with the judge stating as he imposed this sentence that, "I have come to the conclusion that you are not only a burglar, not only a coward, but also a thorough hypocrite." He was released from prison in April 1919 and returned to his wife, who by this stage worked as a secretary in Sunbury-on-Thames. She was able to secure her husband employment as a salesman at the firm. In 1922, Mahon was promoted to the position of sales manager, earning approximately £42 per month. His work regularly required him to travel to the City of London and to the offices of Robertson, Hill & Co. in Moorgate. During a routine visit to this firm, he met a 37-year-old unmarried woman named Emily Kaye, who worked as a shorthand typist. Within weeks of their encounter, the two had begun an affair. She was just one of several women with whom Mahon conducted affairs throughout the course of his marriage, and he introduced himself to Kaye as Derek Patterson. It is likely they embarked on the affair when he discovered that she had savings estimated at £500, the equivalent of approximately £38,600 today. Around 3 months after they met, Kaye discovered, to her joy, that she was pregnant. In March, she became ill with flu. To recuperate, she travelled to the coastal resort town of Bournemouth, where she was soon joined by Mahon, who presented her with a diamond and sapphire cluster engagement ring he had earlier purchased from a Southampton jeweller's. That night, the two shared a room at the Southwestern Hotel, with Mahon signing the register as Mr. and Mrs. P. H. Mahon. His purchasing of an engagement ring seems to have convinced Kaye that his claim of his intentions to marry her were sincere. On her return to work, she informed friends and relatives she and Mahon would soon marry and emigrate to South Africa. On the 5th of April, Kaye wrote a letter to her sister in which she stated Mahon had travelled to Langley to look for a bungalow with a view to renting the property for several weeks as they finalised their plans to emigrate. She is also known to have withdrawn £404 of her savings in February 1924. The vast majority of this money was either given to Mahon or spent or otherwise invested in her plans for their future, that she believed the two had together. According to Mahon's recollection, when his girlfriend told him she was pregnant, he became frightened that his wife would yet again discover his infidelity. He claimed Kaye had known he was a married man prior to their affair, and that, shortly after Kaye discovered she was pregnant, she had insisted that the two embarking upon what she termed a love experiment, whereby she could convince him his reluctance to abandon his wife and children could be overcome if the two spent an extended period of time alone before they bigamously married. It was likely as a means of premeditation with regards to murdering Kaye that he agreed to this proposal and successfully convinced her to travel to an Eastbourne bungalow known as Officer's House, located close to the beach, which he had rented under the assumed name of Waller. Kaye is known to have travelled to Eastbourne on the 7th of April. She stayed for 5 days at the Kenilworth Court Hotel before travelling to Officer's House. Having lied to his wife that he was away on business for several days, Mahon also travelled to the bungalow on the weekend of the 12th and 13th, informing Kaye via telegram to meet him at Eastbourne railway station. Prior to travelling to Eastbourne, he is known to have purchased a 10-inch chef's knife and a tenon saw for an ironmonger's located close to London's Victoria Station. On the 14th of April, Kaye is known to have written a letter to a friend, indicating she and Mahon planned to travel to London the following day in order that she could obtain a passport, adding that they want to visit Paris for Easter and that the two should have about a fortnight together in Eastbourne before emigrating to South Africa. Mahon would later tell investigators he had initially agreed to Kaye's request to obtain a passport, although when he got to London he changed his mind and the couple returned to Eastbourne. He later gave several differing accounts of Kaye's murder to the police, both in detail concerning the events surrounding her death and the actual date of the killing. At his subsequent trial, he testified that when they returned to Officer's House on the 15th of April, he had brought the coal scuttle into the living room, then lit a fire as Kaye wrote a further letter to her friend. When she had finished composing this letter, she turned towards him, insisting he write to his friends, telling them of his decision to relocate to South Africa. He had refused, which resulted in Kaye becoming angry, shouting that she was determined to settle this matter one way or the other tonight, and how much she loved him. Mahon replied that he was going to bed, at which point he claimed she had then thrown an axe at him, which narrowly missed. A scuffle ensued, in which each grabbed the other by the throat. The two then fell over a chair, with Kaye fatally striking her head across the coal scuttle. According to his account, unable to revive her, he only realized towards daybreak what a fool he had been to not attempt to seek medical assistance. He had then covered Kaye's body with a coat before, on the 18th, severing her head and legs and stuffing her remains in a trunk, as he continued to ponder his predicament. In a bizarre twist, Mahon invited a woman with whom he had recently become acquainted, named Ethel Duncan, to spend the Easter weekend at the bungalow with him. She agreed, and the following day Mahon sent her a telegraphic transfer of £4 and a telegram with instructions to meet him at Eastbourne Station the following evening. Duncan was waiting at the station when he arrived at approximately 7:50. She noticed that his wrist was bandaged, which he claimed was a result of his saving a lady from falling off a bus that morning. The two of them spent 3 days at Officer's house, with Mahon spending extravagantly, insisting the two dine nightly at lavish restaurants, and on one occasion visiting the London Palladium. The two parted company on Easter Monday. He then returned to Officer's house, where he proceeded to further cut up Kaye's body. Over the following week, her body was extensively dissected. Her head, feet and legs were incinerated in the fireplace of the bungalow, before Mahon swept the charred skull and bone fragments into a dustpan. He later pulverized these sections of Kaye's body into small fragments, which he claimed to have discarded over the garden wall. No pieces of her skull were ever recovered, although a section of her jawbone and several of her teeth were later found on a refuse heap. Mahon returned to the bungalow on the 26th to continue dismembering Kaye's body. He first severed the arms from the torso, before carving up the rest. Some chunks of her body, which had been boiled down, were put in a brown bag, which he later threw from the window of the train while returning to his home in Richmond. In the years following Mahon's previous release from prison in 1919, his wife had grown increasingly suspicious of the extensive periods of time he spent away from home with the excuse of business trips. Suspecting her husband was again conducting an affair or gambling, she hired a retired detective inspector named John Beard to investigate her husband in April 1924. Searching through the pockets of one of her husband's suits, she discovered a horse racing card and a left luggage ticket dated the 28th of April for a bag currently deposited at Waterloo Station. Presenting the ticket to Beard, the two travelled to the station to inspect the Gladstone bag which, although locked, was seen to contain a large knife and blood-stained cloth. Beard persuaded her to return the ticket to her husband's suit, before contacting Scotland Yard to report his discovery. And Inspector Percy Savage extracted a small sample of cloth from the bag to undergo forensic analysis. This sample revealed the stains to be human blood. 2 undercover policemen were then deployed at the station, with instructions to arrest Mahon when he arrived to collect the bag. At 6:15 on the evening of the 2nd of May, Mahon was arrested when he arrived at Waterloo Station and attempted to pay the 5 pence to retrieve his bag. Confirming it was his property, he was escorted to Kennington Police Station to await the arrival of Inspector Savage, before being taken to Scotland Yard, both for interrogation and in order for the contents of his bag to be inspected. When opened, the contents were revealed to be female clothing and a cook's knife. all of which were heavily stained with blood and grease, and had been sprinkled with disinfectant. A canvas racket bag bearing Kaye's initials was also recovered as part of the contents. Question as to why the contents included a knife and clothing heavily stained with blood. Mahon replied he was fond of dogs and carried home meat for them. In response, Inspector Savage replied, "Dog meat? But this is human blood. You don't wrap dog's meat in silk. Your explanation doesn't satisfy me." Although initially evasive in response to how these blood-stained items came to be in his possession, after several hours of questioning, Mahon suddenly became silent after remarking he was considering his position. He again became silent for almost 15 minutes before saying, "I suppose you know everything. I'll tell you the truth." He then proceeded to confess to his role in Kaye's death, which he claimed had been accidental, having been caused when, in the course of a scuffle, the two had fallen over a chair, with Kaye hitting her head against an iron coal scuttle he had brought into the room earlier that afternoon. Her body could be found at the bungalow he had rented in Eastbourne. According to his statement, for several hours he had unsuccessfully attempted to revive Kaye, before opting to dismember her body with a blunt knife already present at the bungalow. He then claimed to have purchased a chef's knife and tenon saw in London before returning to officer's house, where he had begun to dismember and dispose of her body. He claimed to have ultimately decided to dispose of the dissected portions by discarding them through the windows of railway carriages, and had successfully done this with some section of Kaye's legs. He had intended to dispose of the contents of his Gladstone bag in the same manner, but he had been arrested. Having liaised with their counterparts within the East Sussex Constabulary, the police travelled to officer's house. The same day, a section of Kaye's putrefied and dismembered body were found within a trunk engraved with her initials. Inspector Savage contacted renowned forensic pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury, who arrived in Eastbourne on the 4th of May to assist in the recovery and examination of the remains. In the bedroom of the bungalow, the police recovered a rusty and greasy tenon saw with a section of flesh still attached, plus numerous articles of blood-stained female clothing and a blood-stained tea towel. A saucer containing solid human fat was discovered on the floor of the dining room, and a 2-gallon saucepan containing a section of boiled flesh was found in the living room. The fender was also spattered with body fat, and an examination of the ashes revealed over 900 small, charred fragments of human bone. A hat box recovered from the scullery was found to contain 37 sections of boiled human flesh, muscle, and bone. Each had evidently been severed with a saw. Inside the trunk, Spilsbury discovered 4 large sections of the victim's body, including her lower left abdomen and pelvis, a section of her spine, the right section of her torso, with the upper portion of her femur still attached, a portion of the right side of her chest, including the majority of her entire rib cage, and the left section of the chest, which Spilsbury noted to be extensively bruised around the shoulder. Several organs, including a portion of Kaye's right lung and sections of her kidneys, were stuck to the side of the trunk. Other organs, including her heart, were recovered from a biscuit tin. The doorway and carpet of the living room were heavily blood-stained. Each item was catalogued and removed to Spilsbury's London laboratory for further examination. Following reassembly of the pieces of Kaye's body at the mortuary, Spilsbury discovered some pieces of her body had been boiled and others burned. Although he was able to reconstruct the recovered bits, as a head was not found, he was unable to determine the actual cause of death, although he was able to conclude she had not died as a result of a disease. Spilsbury was also able to determine she had been in the early stages of pregnancy at the time of her murder. Mahon was formally charged with Kaye's death on the 6th of May. He responded to this charge by stating he had already made his statement and it wasn't murder, as his statement clearly showed. A trial date was set for the 15th of July, 1924. It was heard before Mr. Justice Avery at Sussex Assizes. Mahon pleaded not guilty to the charge. In the opening statement on behalf of the Crown, outlining the prosecution's case against the accused, it was alleged that Mahon had embarked on an affair with Kaye for the sole purpose of robbing her of her savings. Adding records to be introduced into evidence would reveal Mahon had received 4 separate payments of £100 from Kaye in the months before her murder, and that he had cashed at least 3 of these payments under the alias of Derek Patterson. The prosecution further stated Kaye's murder had clearly been premeditated as, contrary to Mahon's claims, testimony and evidence would be introduced, proving he had encouraged Kaye to state to acquaintances she and Derek Patterson would soon emigrate to South Africa, and that he had purchased the chef's knife and tenon saw used to dismember Kaye's body on the 12th of April. Contrary to his claims to police, he had bought the items after her death on the 17th. Spilsbury testified on the 3rd day and supported the prosecution's contention that Kaye could not have sustained any fatal injuries from falling upon the coal scuttle, dismissing Mahon's claim that Kaye's death had been accidental. He stated that the extensive bruising about one of the victim's shoulders led him to suspect that the accused had bludgeoned Kaye to death with an axe handle missing from the bungalow, and which, along with her skull, was never found. Spilsbury further stated that contrary to Mahon's claim that Kaye had thrown an axe at him prior to the two engaging in a scuffle, no walls, doors, or door frames within officer's house bore evidence of being struck by an axe. Mahon chose to testify in his own defence for over 5 hours, emphatically denying Kaye's death had been an act of murder. He insisted he had not rented the bungalow as a means of providing privacy with which to murder the victim, but with the intention of maintaining his affair with her, with view to later bringing his wife to the property, claiming Kaye's death had been accidental, having been the culmination of a heated argument. When asked as to why he had started an affair with her, he claimed that she had known he was married, and he quickly realised her intentions to replace his wife. In his final address to the jury on the 19th of July, the judge told them of the evidence presented and the options they should consider. They then retired to ponder their verdict for 45 minutes, before finding Mahon guilty of Emily Kaye's murder. On hearing the jury's verdict, Mahon denounced the bitterness and unfairness of the judge's conduct, again insisting he was not guilty of murder. In formally passing the death sentence against the accused, Mr. Justice Avery stated,
Patrick Herbert Mahon, the jury have arrived at the only proper conclusion on the evidence that was laid before them. They have arrived at the conclusion without knowing anything of your past life. There can be no question that you deliberately designed the death of this woman. For that crime you must suffer the penalty imposed by the law. The sentence of the court upon you is that you be taken from this place to a lawful prison, and then to a place of execution, and that you be hanged by the neck until you be dead, and that your body be afterwards buried within the precincts of the prison, wherein you shall have been last confined before your execution. And may the Lord have mercy upon your soul.
In August, Mahon filed an appeal against his conviction. It contended the jury had been misdirected by Judge Avery, who had failed to sufficiently instruct the jury to consider the possibility of the death having been accidental, and that the judge had also wrongly informed the jury Mahon had admitted Kaye had died at his hands. This appeal was rejected by the Lord Chief Justice. Mahon was executed by hanging in Wandsworth Prison in London on the 3rd of September 1924. He protested his innocence to the end, and is known to have embarked upon a hunger strike following his conviction, also writing several letters, leaving instructions they should not be opened until after his death. Contemporary news reports indicated he walked stoically to the scaffold without uttering a word.